He raised his weapon, took aim, and froze, because the man standing in front of him wasn't just the enemy. He was his only chance to live, and instead of pulling the trigger, the enemy did something no one could ever explain. He lowered his gun and walked away. The air was thick with smoke, not just the grey wisp of a dying fire, but the heavy, choking black smog of burning rubber, shattered concrete, and exploded earth. Gunfire echoed in the distance, sharp and relentless. It was a rhythm he had grown used to over the last 6 months. The staccato pop of rifles, the deep, chest-rattling thud of mortar. The battlefield had turned into absolute chaos hours ago. The command structure had dissolved. Formations had shattered into desperate, isolated pockets of survival. But now, it was something worse. Quiet, not peaceful, but empty. It was the kind of silence that only comes after everything of value has already been destroyed. He was alone. He had been separated from his unit during the last brutal push through the valley. One moment, he was moving alongside his squad, covering the flank. The next, an artillery shell had thrown the world upside down. When he finally dug himself out of the dirt and ringing deafness, there was no one left. No radio, just the dead hiss of static in his earpiece. No backup, no way out, just mud that clung to his boots like wet cement. Ruins of homes that used to hold families, now reduced to jagged teeth of timber and stone. And worst of all, the constant, prickling feeling at the back of his neck that he was being watched. He moved slowly through what used to be a village. Every step was careful, deliberate. Every sound was amplified in his mind. The scrape of his rifle sling against his armor sounded like a siren. A broken wooden door creaked lazily in the wind, swinging on a single rusted hinge. Glass crunched under his boots. He winced, freezing in place. He held his breath for 10 seconds, listening, waiting, and then a sound behind him. The unmistakable squelch of a boot pulling out of thick mud. He turned instantly. Muscle memory took over, but he was too late. A soldier stood just a few meters away, emerging from the dense smoke like a phantom. His uniform was the dull, dusty color of the opposing army. His rifle was already raised, tucked tight against his shoulder, locked dead on his chest. There was no time to react, no time to dive for the crumbling brick wall to his left. No cover, no escape, just the cold, heavy, unavoidable truth pressing down on him. This was the end. His war was over. For a moment, everything stopped. The spinning world halted on its axis. There was no gunfire, no movement, no orders being screamed over the radio. Just 2 men, standing in the absolute ruins of a man-made hell. Both were breathing heavily, their chests heaving, sending plumes of white frost into the freezing air. Both were covered in the same grey dust, the same dark mud. Both were exhausted down to their very bones, and both were fully, agonizingly aware that only one of them would walk away from this alley. He tightened his grip on his own rifle. His finger brushed the trigger guard. He knew he couldn't raise it fast enough. If he twitched, the enemy would fire. Physics and reaction time dictated he was already dead. But something felt wrong. The enemy soldier wasn't firing. His stance was perfect. His weapon was incredibly steady, not shaking even a fraction of an inch. But his finger wasn't moving. Instead, he was staring. He wasn't looking at the American flag patch on his shoulder. He wasn't looking at the insignia on his collar. He was looking directly into his eyes. There was no anger there, no nationalist fury. There was no fear either. It was something else entirely. Something terrifyingly human. Their eyes met, locking across the 5 meters of ruined cobblestone that separated them. And in that single, stretched out second, the war completely disappeared. The uniforms turned to rags. The ideologies they were fighting for evaporated into the smoke. The generals, the politicians, the borders, none of it existed in this alleyway. There were no sides, just 2 people. 2 young men who had been dragged halfway across the world, handed weapons and told to kill each other. 2 people who desperately, fundamentally, didn't want to die. Seconds passed, but to the man staring down the barrel, it felt like hours, maybe longer. He felt a lifetime pass in the space between heartbeats. He expected the shot. He was ready for it. He was bracing his core, waiting for the sudden, violent punch to his chest, waiting for the lights to go out. He accepted it. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, making peace with the mud he was about to fall into. Waiting, but the crack of the rifle never came. He opened his eyes. Instead of pulling the trigger, the enemy was moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the muzzle of the enemy's rifle dipped. Not quickly, like a man surrendering. Not dramatically, like a movie scene. Just slowly, methodically. The barrel pointed away from his chest, tracking down until it was aimed harmlessly at the broken cobblestones, as if the decision had already been made long before they ever crossed paths. The suffocating tension broke. The air rushed back into the alleyway, but the relief was instantly swallowed by profound confusion. Why? Why would he do that? This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't hesitation. You don't survive this deep into a combat zone by hesitating. This wasn't fear. The man holding the gun had all the power. This was a choice. A deliberate, conscious, utterly impossible choice. In a place where mercy meant death, this man had just chosen mercy. The enemy took one last look at him. A long, unreadable look that seemed to say 1,000 things without a single word spoken. He turned, and he walked away. His boots made no sound as he stepped backward into the heavy grey smoke. The fog wrapped around him, consuming his silhouette. Within seconds, he was gone, disappearing into the mist, as if he had never been there at all for several long seconds. He didn't move. He couldn't. His brain was misfiring. His body was still rigidly tensed, still expecting the bullet to tear through his vest, still waiting for the lethal impact that never came. He felt like a ghost who didn't yet realize he was still alive. Then, slowly, his muscles unlocked. He lowered his own weapon. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds. His hands were shaking violently. He looked down at his trembling fingers. It wasn't from fear anymore. The fear had burned out. He was shaking from something much deeper. Confusion, shock, a profound, staggering disbelief. He had just been given something no soldier ever expects to find in the middle of a slaughter. A reprieve, grace, mercy. He stumbled forward a few steps, his boots heavy, and looked down the alley in the exact direction the enemy had gone. Gone, completely gone. The smoke swirled lazily where the man had just stood. There were no footprints in the hard rubble, no discarded gear, like an apparition sent just to test him and then vanish. The battlefield slowly came back to life around him. The spell was broken. Distant explosions rocked the earth. He could hear faint shouting from the next block over. Movement, the grim machinery of war, grinding back into gear, but none of it felt real anymore. The war felt small now, insignificant compared to what had just happened in this 10-foot stretch of dirt, because something fundamental inside him had changed. He looked down at his own chest, where a bullet hole should have been. He was still alive, and he had absolutely no idea why the war ended. Eventually, like all wars do, it didn't end with a single victorious moment or a parade. It ended with a slow, exhausting fading of violence. Treaties were signed in rooms thousands of miles away by men who had never smelled burning concrete. Troops were pulled back. The guns went quiet. Years passed. Life moved on. He went back home. He traded his rifle for a briefcase, his combat boots for civilian shoes. He got a job. He tried to blend back into a society that had no idea what he carried in his head. But that moment, it never moved on. It stayed with him, anchored deep in his subconscious. It was as clear on a Tuesday morning in a coffee shop as it was the day it happened. Sharp, unforgiving, unchanged. He could still perfectly visualize the soldier's face. The dirt smudged across his cheek, the fraying fabric on the collar of his uniform. He still remembered the way the man had looked at him. Not like an enemy, not like an obstacle to be cleared or a threat to be neutralized, but like someone who understood the grand, tragic joke of it all. Someone who made a decision that went entirely against everything their training, their commanders, and the war itself demanded. When you survive something you shouldn't have, people call you lucky, but luck implies randomness. This wasn't random. Someone had chosen to let him live, and the question haunted his quiet moments. It echoed in his empty apartment. It kept him awake at 3 a.m. Why? Why me? Why did you stop? He tried to forget. At first, he really did. He tried to pack the memory away in a mental box alongside all the other horrors he had survived. He tried to move on and just be grateful for the breath in his lungs. But some moments refuse to fade. They don't shrink with time. They grow. They demand resolution. And this one became impossible to ignore. It became an obsession. So he started searching. He dug through declassified military records. He spent nights scrolling through endless databases of old after-action reports, troop movements, and unit deployments from that specific sector. He tracked down battle locations, cross-referencing weather patterns and skirmish logs. He was looking for anything that could lead him back to that exact alley, on that exact day. Eventually, years later, he bought a plane ticket. He returned to the place where it happened. The village was drastically different now. It was rebuilt. The craters had been filled. The shattered stones had been replaced with clean brick. Cafes had opened where sniper nests used to be. It was alive again. But beneath the fresh paint, he could still recognize its bones. He found the street. He found the corner. He stood on the exact spot where he should have died a decade ago. And didn't. He spent weeks in the town. He asked around at local historical societies. He showed old, faded maps to anyone who would listen. He hired a translator and described the uniform the man wore. He sketched the insignia he remembered seeing on his shoulder. Anything, please. Just tell me who was stationed here. Most people didn't know. The war was a painful chapter they wanted to keep closed. Some didn't remember. The chaos had blurred the faces of the occupying forces together. It felt like a dead end, a ghost hunt. But then, someone did remember. An old man, quiet, observant. A man who had lived his entire life in that village and had watched armies wash over it like a dark tide. He sat across from him, listening carefully to the translator. When the story was finished, the old man slowly nodded. He remembered the soldiers passing through during that specific month. He remembered the unit that wore that patch. They weren't monsters, the old man said softly. They were young. So young, tired. Not like the heroes in the propaganda posters. Just boys. Terrified boys trying to survive a meat grinder. And then the old man said something strange. Something that made the breath catch in his throat. There was one, the old man said, staring into his glass. One who never fired his weapon. The words hit him instantly. A jolt of electricity straight to the heart. The old man explained. This particular soldier had been known among the villagers and whispered about among his own ranks. Not because he was weak, not because he was a coward or afraid of combat. He was always at the front, but he was different. He followed his marching orders. He moved with his unit through the urban combat zones. He carried his gear. He stood his watch. But when it came time to shoot, he hesitated. Sometimes he intentionally missed. Sometimes he didn't shoot at all. He carried his rifle, but he refused to let it take a life. No one understood why. His officers punished him. His squad mates mocked him. But he never broke his silent rule. And then, one day, toward the end of the fighting in that sector, he disappeared. There was no official record of a death, no report of a capture, no desertion file. He was just gone, swallowed up by the war. The search ended right there at that table. There would be no name. There would be no face to attach to a gravestone. No final, definitive answer he could write down in a book. Just a story, an unfinished one, an echo of a man who vanished into the mist. But as he walked out of that tavern and into the cool evening air, he realized that somehow that was enough, because the truth he was searching for wasn't in finding out who the man was. The truth was in what he did. In a moment where the entire world demanded violence, where the rules of survival dictated that he pulled that trigger, he chose something else. He chose something rare, something beautiful, something almost impossible in the darkness of human conflict. He chose not to kill. And because of that single, quiet rebellion, one life continued. A life that would go on to see peace, to build a family, to remember a phantom in the fog, to tell the story of the enemy, who wasn't really an enemy at all.